In today's episode of our photography review show, we're gonna review photos from 29 photographers. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. For those who don't know me, my name is Jakub and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England. Now, for the last 2 or 3 years I've been reviewing photos of my colleagues and friends, and it's something what we decided to offer to our photography community here at Clever Photographer. Now it's been very successful, and for the past 6 months we review hundreds of photos from hundreds of photographers. Now, following this success, we had to limit the amount of photos each photographer can upload to 1 or 2 per week. What we also have to do, we have to take the show and divide it between 2 or 3 parts, depending on how many photos we receive. Now, before we're gonna jump into the reviews, I wanted to remind you about 2 things. First of all, it's our brand new Facebook photography group called Clever Photographer Academy. You can come and join us there and talk all things photography. What do we do there? We review photos throughout the week, we talk about photography, we answer your questions, we help you with whatever you need, and we also do specific photography competitions there for prices like Luminar and Photoshop and lots of other things. So it's a lots of fun, and if you have a moment, make sure you join us there. Just head to Facebook, search for Clever Photographer Academy and join us today. And finally, before we start with the reviews, I want to tell you a little bit more about our photographer of the week of the past episode. So here we are, it's time to look at the photographer of the week, and this week I'm really happy to introduce you to Donna Ruiz and her incredible wildlife photos. So Donna, we are here at her Instagram page, and as you can see, lots of beautiful photos of animals. And the reason why we decided that we're gonna choose Donna for this photographer of the week is her bear photography. So as you can see, beautiful pictures here, and then when we scroll a little here as well, and beautiful detail of the face. And really one of the main things which stand out of Donna's work is the composition. Lots of photographers are able to capture animals, but you need to have a little bit of special feel or an eye for the interaction of the animals. I think that adds another whole level to the photography, and Donna is really good at that. Right here, the bears actually fighting with each other, then here with the little ones, then later on obviously the bear is carrying the fish, and then later on the bear catching the fish in the actual river. It really works, it's really well done. Then you add to it the number of other beautiful captures with the birds and with the eagles, and it's just incredible. So great portfolio, Donna, congratulations, you totally deserve to be our photographer of the week. Best of luck in 2022 on your photography, and keep sending us your photos, it's always a pleasure to see them. And anyway, that's it. So if you want to find out more about Donna, you can get and find out more about her in our newsletter or on our social media. And also you can visit her page, and the address can be found here. So that's us for now. Let's jump into the reviews. And here we are back in the Lightroom. Just as a reminder, if you want to join us, if you want to send us your photos, and if you want to become the photographer of the week, make sure you head to our website cleverphotographer.com/review, and that's where you can find all the links, and that's where you can find all the uploads and information about how you can join us already for the next week's episode of the photography review show. And of course, as always, if you can make sure that you hit the like button, leave us a comment, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can continue creating content like this, it would be super helpful. But now let's jump straight into it. So first one, we have Alan. Alan sent us one photo, so let's have a look at it right away. So let's just zoom in here. And Alan, so we have this window, beautiful panoramic window with a stunning scene behind, and then this kind of almost silhouette like looking image. I think it's very clever what you've done here. It looks very interesting. From my first kind of look at it, I think I would crop it a little bit more. I would just kind of remove this to make the composition a little bit more balanced. I would also check the geometry just to make sure that everything is nice and in line. And For the future, just kind of thinking about it, and one thing I would probably wish from my personal point of view would be that you would have just a few less people there, just to make it a little bit more basic and simple. So I think maybe like 1, 2, 3, 4 people, just to make it a little bit more balanced. I think there's a lot happening in front, and it taking a little bit of attention away from the actual panorama there. But let's jump into it. Let's see if we have any camera details, and we have. So you use Nikon D7 1000, and your settings were ISO 200, 26mm lens, setup, f5.6, 1/400 of a second. So as the setting goes on, nothing really wrong here. ISO 200 is very decent for this kind of light situation. I'm assuming looking at it, it was kind of low light. F5.6, again, working together with the light. It's kind of more on the lower side, but you totally looking for a faster shutter speed to make sure that the people are sharp as much as possible, so it works as well. And then obviously, most importantly, you're looking for the detail outside. So you most likely exposing for outside to make sure that everything is nice and sharp there and that you get a nice light there. So when it comes to the settings, nothing really much I can add. I think it's very nicely done. And looking at it like this, I see the sharpness, I see a nice detail in the sky. The silhouette-like look works quite well for me. So in overall, technically, I think it's quite well handled. Well done, Alan. Now moving to the composition, as I say, I think it's very, very smart. I would look at the geometry to start with, just to make sure that everything is nice and balanced. So let's start by that. If I go here into the edit, and then I go into the geometry and try the auto option, right away it takes the lines and just makes that they are a little bit more straight. So the whole thing work a little bit more. If it wouldn't work, what we can always do, we can just go into the guided, and then you just paint the lines yourself. So let's say we use this kind of black window part as a one leading line, and then this black part again as another leading line. And right away we are a little bit more straight. And then depends what we want to do. We can paint another one here again and do something like this. And we can paint one more just to straighten everything up. So we'll use again the window, as we take the window as the main leading line, and there we have it. So everything is nice and straight now, except the building here, which was probably kind of falling anyway, but right away we have everything a little bit more balanced. After that, when it comes to composition, the only thing I would do, I would probably crop it a little bit tighter just to get rid of this yellow block. First, because it takes lots of attention away, and then it makes the composition a little bit unbalanced. Obviously, because we're missing this part of the, if this pillar would be here, it would be nice balance, it would create a nice frame in frame, but like this, I don't think it necessarily needs to be there. I think the volcano is the main subject. So what I would do, I would probably crop it a little bit to something like this, and here as well, just so we have a same amount on each side. And then right away, we have much more balanced composition, and I think it's much cleaner. So beautiful, beautiful image. And this is what you could do with it. Let's have a look at it like this. I think something like this. So either way, well done. Even this row here kind of make really nice leading lines. So altogether, just great, and something a little bit different than what you see all the time. Now, when it comes to post-processing, I think the post-processing is done quite nicely. The silhouette, again, I think it works. So let's just kind of quickly look behind the scene if we can open the shadows just to see. So obviously a really kind of low light situation. One thing I would keep an eye on is the chromatic aberration. I can see a little bit of purple lines. I don't know if you can see it on the video, but in these kind of parts. And it's not a surprise with this kind of light conditions, and with the dynamic range the camera would have to work with. Is nothing major. Obviously, some of it can be removed in Lightroom, some of it can be removed in Photoshop if you feel like you need to do further work. There is just a little bit of it here. Other than that, I think it's quite nicely done, to be honest. Nothing much I would add. Maybe just to add a little bit more contrast, I would go into the effects and create a little vignette here, just to close it a little bit more. I would maybe brighten it just a touch on the exposure and add maybe a little bit of contrast. Also, you can always make sure that your white balance is right by looking at the auto and seeing what that will do. But in overall, I think the white balance is fine as well. So altogether, Alan, brilliant capture, love it. Something totally different, and with few touches, just to make it a little bit more balanced. I think the result is excellent, and well done on you for sending us over. So take care and send us more pictures in the future. We can't wait to see them. Moving on, next another photographer, we have Alex. Alex, we have 2 images from you this week, so thank you again for sending us even more images. First, we have this lovely little bridge with lovely leading line, lots happening on the image itself. From a kind of first point of view, I would again just make sure that everything is nice and straight to make it a little bit more balanced. I think specifically when you're shooting these kind of bridges and paths, you really want it to have it centered so it works, or go more to the side to then really showcase the angle. So this is like a little bit of in between, and something maybe we can adjust a little bit in a moment in a post-processing, but still lovely image. There is some nice texture in the sky, nice colors, and the leading line is here as well. So it's very cool. Now looking at this one, Alex, interesting sky, and then interesting subject, obviously some kind of rocks. The contrast works really well here as well. And in overall, I think it's quite nice. Yeah, maybe I would crop a little bit the sky away. I don't think it all needs to be there. And other than that, I think it's quite cool. So let's jump straight into it. So looking at the first image, let's see if we have information about the image. So you're using Canon 6D Mark II, and the settings ISO 100, f7, 125th of a second. So that's a spot on settings exactly for this situation. No complicated light situation, really kind of straightforward setting, keeping the ISO nice and low. So well done, Alex. This is great. Absolutely no problem. I wouldn't do anything differently. Obviously, if you would get closer to the subjects themselves, I would maybe go up a little bit with the f-stop, heading towards like a f9, f11, but like this still, as you can see, everything is nice and sharp, no issues here, so well done. Moving on this image, when it comes to your settings, similar ISO 100, f7.1, 1/500th of a second. Again, very well done. No issue here. The subject is kind of well lit. Exposure is good. I don't see any additional noise. Everything is nice and sharp. So Alex, altogether again, very well done. Moving on the composition. So the idea here works very well. I really like the kind of leading line. The only thing is that the leading line doesn't really point to any specific part of the image. So I think the goal of the leading line is to kind of bring the attention towards something which you're a little bit missing. Maybe the trees goes away here. So that's just something to kind of think about for the future. Also, when you're using this kind of very specific leading line, when it's kind of centered and when you shooting it straight forward, you really want it to be directly centered in front of you, so the composition is nice and balanced. So in this case, what I would do, I would go in the geometry and use the guided geometry. So let's do that. And I would just make sure that this is straight like this. And then I would go somewhere at the back and again, make sure it's straight. And then I get something like this. And then I could straight the actual pillars here by doing something like this. And suddenly I'm getting the fence and the front right in front of me. And then all I have to do, I just have to crop it a little bit more. So maybe something like this and something like this. And this is not necessarily something you have to do with it, but that's the kind of picture I would be looking for the future when it comes to composition. Something like this. Suddenly we have a straight fence in front of us, walking over. It's really nice balance, and it just works. It's much more pleasing for the eye. So this is what I would do with it when it comes for composition. And again, it's always a question about how high or low to go, and it really depends on what is the leading line pointing at, where in this case I'm assuming the rocks are the main subjects, but just something to think of in the future. Specifically when it comes to these compositions, you want to kind of look for something they pointing towards. So that's about it. Let me reset this, put it back where we've been. And then on this one, As a composition goes, it comes across a little bit flat because they are kind of really very defined steps of the image. You have this kind of grass, and then you have the rock, and then you have pretty much kind of nothing. So it's just kind of missing some elements. Maybe one of the rocks being a little bit closer, maybe a leading line. There was some kind of path which I wonder if you could use just to add another 3D element to the whole picture. But in overall, it's quite well balanced. Again, like I said earlier, I would maybe take away a little bit of the sky because it's just a lot of the same thing repeating. But that's about it. You know, I mean, I don't know necessarily if this would need to be there, but you know more about the location than I. But for example, if you would kind of go like this and basically position the main subject on your third of the image and go for something like this, it's also very interesting. Just really depends on what you want to do with it. There is fundamentally nothing wrong with the composition. It's just kind of missing a little bit of the depth, and I wonder what could we use in order to add it for the future. Maybe the leading line would help here, but that's about it. Moving on to post-processing, I already kind of show you what I would do here, or what I kind of done before. Let's see if we can repeat it. If it would be in this case, what I would do, I would definitely add a vignette to really point towards the bridge. I would maybe work a little bit with some of the local adjustments. Again, just kind of bringing up the bridge itself, maybe not that much, something like this. And that's about it. The image is nice, the white balance is nice, the exposure is well done, the shadows, highlights works very well here. So in overall, super well done. On this one, the sky seems to be a little bit darker, and in overall, the image seems to be just a little bit darker for me. So when we jump into the actual editing, we go in the light, and look for the exposure. Maybe something like this would be more what we were looking for. And then again, the sky a little bit doesn't match to what's happening on the foreground. Again, when I look at the foreground and the middle ground, it's nice, bright and saturated. And the background seems to be a little bit darker. So what you can do now, you can go into the masking. You can click on select sky. So basically it does the sky selection. And then you can just little brighten it again, just to match the overall image, I think. Also, I think I would make it just a little bit more bluer. And that's about it. And once I do this, now I can really go in and edit the whole picture, because now both of the elements really match together. So now any edit I do to it, it kind of corresponds with the whole image. So if I add some contrast, it kind of adding it equally at the same time to your foreground, middle ground, and the sky. So overall, well done, Alex, as always. Love to see your photos. Take care and send us more in the future if you have a time. Moving on to next, we have a David. David, we have 2 images from you, so let's jump straight into them. David, we have this silhouette-like with the sun hiding behind the tree. Very interesting capture. And then we have this one with lots of, kind of from just first look at it, lots of noise and some like quite heavy lens leak through the sun. But then the sun has a beautiful, beautiful this kind of effect of the starburst, which looks very nice. I see what you're trying to do here. Let's see what the camera settings were. So starting from this one, first of all, let's have a look. If we have the details here, and we do, again, you're using Fujifilm. When it comes to your camera settings, you were ISO 200, f22, 1/500 of a second. So let's have a look. Let's just kind of open the image to see what's kind of hiding behind. So not much. It's all seem to be kind of hidden. So you were going for kind of silhouette look, and this all is very dark. From setting itself, nothing really wrong here, except I'm not 100% sure why you went for the f22. What was the purpose? Even though your ISO is nice and low, 200 is very kind of, it's fine, nothing wrong with that. 1/500 of a second, you wouldn't need to be as fast. There's just no need for this kind of situation, specifically when you're shooting light source with the kind of vignette effect. You can go much slower than this. And f22 is also quite high. So as I always say, if you have a moment to write me in a comment under the video why you went for the f22, it would be super helpful. So then I understand what's the kind of thought process of this and help you there. But as the silhouette comes, nothing much wrong. The sun is behind, so you kind of just get a glow. It's interesting. I see a little bit of a sensor dust here, just to something to kind of keep an eye on for the future. It can be easily removed by using this healing brush. You can really just kind of click and work around with it and then kind of remove it just for the future. I see one there. And that's about it. So that's just something to look an eye on. Now, looking at this picture, again, we can look at the settings. So this time we are on ISO 200, f16, 1/250th of a second. So you're going for a kind of higher f-stops. In this case, it kind of makes sense because you went for the starburst, but the starburst has always a little bit of a worry that it will bring these kind of artifacts, blurs, leaks, and I personally think they work, but always just to some degree, and to the degree where it start to be disturbing, and you getting closer to the edge when it's kind of taking lots of attention away from the rest of the image. With ISO 200, I'm not sure why you're getting so much noise in the darker areas, but with f16, that's maybe the reason why you see you getting kind of you getting lots of noise in these parts. And the rest seems to be fine. So again, if you have a moment, just kind of write why you went for the f16, f22, just so I can understand more. It's a lovely picture anyway. I think the starburst or sunburst really work here. So in overall, technically quite well done. Just something to understand about the f16. Keeping an eye on the artifacts and light leaks, on lens flares, and keeping an eye on the noise as well for the future. Now, talking about composition, loads happening here. It's really busy scene. You're not 100% sure about what's the main subject. I get the idea, obviously, working with the sun, working with the silhouette, working with nice sky. It's just, I'm not 100% sure. It doesn't also have a defined kind of middle ground, background, foreground. It's like trying to put lots of different nice things together, and sometimes it works and sometimes it isn't. In this case, I think it's a little bit overwhelming, the scene. I think if you would show this to somebody, they wouldn't necessarily know what to look at to start with. If anything, I would probably crop it a little bit to kind of make it a little bit more simpler, to go maybe more for something like this, just to kind of avoid some of the disturbing facts. So then you really have just the sun and the main part of the tree with some branches. And that way you kind of simplifying it and maybe make it a little bit more simpler than that. So that's about this one. On this one, yeah, the sunburst works. Again, it's missing a little bit of the depth, because there are no really visible elements which would help the viewer. Also, the sun obviously being as big on this kind of size of the picture, it takes most of the attention away from the rest of the image. So as always, the viewer always focus first on the brightest and whitest part of the image. And in this case, it's the sun and it's quite dominant. So that's your main subject. I understand that. Compared to the first image, this is much better. There's an idea behind, well executed, but I would probably be looking for few more elements to kind of incorporate it in. Still just something to kind of think of for the future. It's never really easy to shoot directly into the sun, especially at kind of this time of the day when it's so powerful, but still well done, good idea, and definitely keep trying. When it comes to post-processing, nothing much I would add here, to be honest. I think the silhouette kind of work. The white balance, making it almost kind of monotone, I think works quite well as well here. The sun doesn't seem to be burned out as far as I can see. And it's all right. Yeah, I would crop it differently as I already show you, but that's about it. Talking about this one, definitely the noise is one thing. I would also keep an eye on my white balance. It seems to be way too green. So if I go into the color and then I go into the white balance and look for auto, you see how it kind of pushes the tint right away up. That's because obviously it sees lots of green as well. Let me show you before and after. I'm not 100% sure if you can see it on the video, but I can see it a lot before even looking at it. Quite often what happens when you have a camera which takes picture with lots of same color, like green in this case, and then sometimes it gets distracted by something as powerful as the sun. What it does, it basically takes the dominant color and start to push the tint of it in the other areas of the picture where it doesn't make sense. So in this case, when I go for the auto, you can see how it really nicely balanced and right away it makes really nice and simple improvement. Other than that, obviously in the details you could push a little bit of the noise away if you haven't done it already, just by using the noise reduction. I usually never go above 20 because then it starts to really bring lots of softness and loss of color. You can also try to use the color noise reduction, and I think it helps a little bit in this case. If it takes too much away, you can always then push back the sharpening. By doing it, you kind of continue repeating the same story. You add sharpness, you add noise, you remove noise, you lose a little bit of sharpness. So the idea is to really find the kind of sweet spot about what exactly you're looking for and what you're able to give out on one or the other. Anyway, David, well done. Both great ideas, and I think it's just a question of keep trying and finding out what works the best. I think this one with the starburst and with a little bit of the kind of flow through it with the tree works a little bit better. If you have more, make sure you send them over. It's always a pleasure to see your images. Anyway, moving on to the next photographer, Doug. I have 2 images from you, and always such a pleasure to see. So one of my favorite locations in London, the Tower Bridge with a stunning sunset. Let's see if we can see when did you capture it. 1st of January 2022. We're talking about Happy New Year here, right? Beautiful photo. And here, St. Paul Cathedral, I'm assuming from the top of the shopping center, maybe. Still a beautiful capture. Stunning foreground here, nice colors, a little bit more moody, but I think the warmth of the city in a combination with this blue sky works very well. So let's have a look at it. We also have the before. So this is the before, this is the after. Let's see. Quite nice, nicely done. And on this one, we have this before and this after. So obviously you had to remove the board, then you had to recreate the whole tower. So excellent work, well done. Looking at it from kind of first impression, I would probably take away even a little bit of the blue sky. I don't necessarily think it's all needed there. It doesn't add much to the composition itself, but that's just, some of these suggestions are more personal thing rather than you have to do that. It's just, obviously your main subject is the bridge. So when you look at it, you have a 1/3 of the river, 1/3 of the bridge, and then 1/3 of the sky, and the sky is really just blue. So I would probably just shift it down a little, maybe just something like this, and look for something like this to make it a little bit more powerful. Other than that, beautiful capture. Not an easy one, usually at this time of the day with lots of contrast. So let's have a look how you handle it in your settings. So you're using Sony a7R II. Your lens is 24-105 f4, same like I have. Your settings, ISO 100, spot on, f18, 10 second. So you're getting nice long exposure, nice flow in the sky itself. Well done. So I'm assuming with the f18 you were maybe going for a longer exposure, so shooting without the filter, if I understand it right. The setting is spot on. You kept the ISO nice and low, and this is why we kind of almost have no noise other than whatever would come with obviously the kind of darker areas of the image. The glow is really lovely as well. It kind of comes across, and again the combination of the blue with the glow of the city I think works quite well. Now looking at this one, let's have a look again. Your settings, ISO 200, f4.5, 1/4 of a second. Let's see if we can see the original here. So obviously no long exposure here. And going for the f4.5, I wonder if you were maybe just on monopod or no tripod at all, or because looking at the first, you were well on ISO 100 and going for the long exposure. This one, obviously looking at the detail, how much the bus is in the detail and everything, the idea wasn't a long exposure here, so that's fine as well, as long as you keep the ISO manageable and as long as the f-stop works for you and you keep the details. And looking at it like you did, maybe on the edges a little bit here when you go closer, there is a little bit of lost. And to be honest, funny enough, there is a little bit of noise, more than on the first one, especially on the edges of the image, which is quite normal, specifically when you're using kind of, when you are in a darker or lower light situations. But in overall, anyway, still, I quite like the result. And what you done here. So talking about composition, I told you about this one, and what I would do, I would probably crop it a little bit down, as I showed you a little earlier, just simply following the rule that if it doesn't add anything to the storytelling, if it doesn't add anything to the composition, it doesn't need to be there. And I think as the main subject is the bridge, I would really focus on it. What I also really like, and I think it works really well on the composition when it comes to reflection, is to put the reflection as close as to the center of the image, because it makes it a really nice balance. It's not necessarily a rule, but I think it really helps. And this, I think, is a little bit stronger for me anyway. Other than that, it's awesome. We get some kind of foreground reminder with the boats, obviously the bridge being your main subject, and then at the back, the background works very nice. I think the reflection also helps as a leading line, so again, great. And the contrast works for us here as well, with the kind of warmer colors in foreground and the middle of the image, and the cooler colors on the top and at the back. So as the composition goes, this one is great. This one as well, great composition. Your main subject starting almost as a foreground with obviously this thing here, focusing on the cathedral right here with the nice warm colors, and then moving through the image with the buildings and with the kind of dramatic sky on the top. Again, creating nice contrast with the warmth compared to the blue. I think that's another way to do it, is really cool down the picture and just let some of the warm parts pop out. Is really helpful, and in overall I think it works very well here. I have nothing to add here. Let's just look at the original. Obviously some straightening, you had to remove some parts of the image here, so a little bit of the bus is missing, but it's not a big deal. I think it's still a great photo. Moving on to post-processing, so nothing much to add here. I would maybe open the shadows just touch bit more, specifically for this part of the image, just so it can be a little bit more recognizable. It's there, and since it's there, so you remove this boat, which makes completely sense, but since you kept those in, I would just have them a little bit more visible. That would be me. Other than that, I think the white balance, the drama looks quite cool for me. The yellow here has a little bit of green tint in it, but as far as I remember, it maybe has the light there anyway, so it's not really a big deal, but just something to kind of keep an eye on. And other than that, is very cool. Lots of contrast, obviously, on this image, but that's how it comes at this time of the year. On this one, when it comes to post-processing, keep an eye on the halo around the building. You can see you have kind of white line running all the way through the top and around. So just something to kind of keep an eye on this part. There was another thing I saw earlier, and I think that you can see it more before and after. And maybe that's because just, again, you have a little bit of halo running here, and this one is kind of disappearing there. So just something to keep an eye on again. And other than that, I quite like it. I like how it's open, how it's lit. I like the dodge and burn on this one. Again, I like the white balance. So both of them great images. Few kind of tips if it helps for the future, something different what I would do. And other than that, just keep shooting, keep sending us your photos. Thank you for all your activity in the group. It's always really, really welcome. And take care until next time. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a Dr. Moshe. Let's have a look at your pictures right here. So let's jump into it. First, we have this kind of parking spot or a runabout in front of the buildings. So kind of night cityscape with other lights starting here. And then we have a garden with a nice kind of circle frame in frame. So let's talk about the images. Starting with this one, let's have a look at your settings. So Nikon D5600, ISO 320, f7.1, 0.3 second shutter speed. So when we just kind of zoom in, I have to say that it doesn't look that it's 100% sharp. So sharpness would be the first thing I would be looking for. With this kind of setting, definitely go for tripod, specifically at this time of the night as well, when it's so dark. At this time of the night, you gotta be shooting with a tripod. If you're shooting with a tripod and there is no moving objects, which there are not here or some, go always for ISO 100 and then f-stop, depending on what you're going for. In this case, again, no nearby elements, so go for f7, which was a good choice. And then let the camera really tell you what shutter speed you're looking for. In this case, probably a little bit longer, but it doesn't make a big difference. So you set up your camera, you put your ISO 100, f7, f7.1 f-stop, and then your exposure, depending on the camera, tells you. Then you make sure that you use a timer, 2 second, 5 second, or remote control, and you let the camera take the picture. So no touching, no shakes, everything is nice and sharp, and there is no noise. In your case, with the 320, you can right away see when I zoom in, there is a lot of noise on the building. So with lowering the ISO, you would get reduce of that. There is a little bit of softness on the image. Again, by setting your camera on a tripod, using the remote control, you would get rid of that. And the f-stop is fine because, again, everything is a little bit further. So that's my comment and my kind of recommendation for that shot. On this shot, obviously being technically much easier with the kind of simple light situation. You have a bright day. Let's have a look. ISO 100, so perfect here. f6.3, which is ideal. I always try to stay between 7 and 11 when it comes to f-stops. And the reason is very simple. Most lenses at this day and age perform the best in this range between 7 and 11. You can use all the other numbers, but this is usually the sweet spot, so that's where I would stick in. 6.3 will not give you any extra depth of field anyway. It's not like you're gonna have a blur at some point. So that's where I would stick into. 1/320th of a second is fine. Again, no moving object, so whatever the camera was telling you was right. But the ISO 100 is great here because when I zoom in, you can see pretty much no noise. Also, when I look at it from here, again, there is everything is nice and sharp all the way through. There is no noise in the sky. So on this one, well done. But I totally get why this one has a little bit of opportunities, and the reason being that it's much more complicated image than the first one. When it comes to composition, I'm trying to figure out what is the main subject. What is it you're trying to show? Obviously, it's a kind of nighttime cityscape. There are some cars going, but there is a lot kind of happening around. There is this street which is empty. There are other buildings. There is a lot happening at the back as well. There is lots of kind of lights. So lots of different lights takes attention away. So I'm sure it's an interesting subject, but I would maybe look for something a little bit simpler to start with. Also, I would maybe crop it a little bit more, just to something like this, and see if that would be helpful, just to get a little bit more simpler composition. See if we would even crop it here, just to get on a center. Again, always keep an eye on the geometry and make sure that you kind of check that everything is nice and straight. And this is where I would maybe go from. It's kind of missing a little bit of a foreground element. There isn't any. And let's say this is middle ground. That's your background. Just kind of lots happening on one image. Although, lovely idea, just something to keep an eye on. This one, I think the kind of leading line of this works really nice. It creates really nice frame. There's not much happening in the sky. If the sky would be a little bit more interesting, it would be a nicer, maybe a few more clouds or something. But I think when it comes between two of them, this one is a little bit better. And I really like what you kind of trying to do here. So in overall composition wise, it's nice. There's a foreground here, middle ground, background, the sky with the texture. Well done there. Post-processing, let's just have a look. I think the sharpness is one thing. Noise you can remove in the details, or try at least some of it. A little bit more exposure. I'm assuming when I open the shadows, you can see how there is a kind of lack of details in these darker areas. So something to kind of keep an eye on for the future. Little bit of exposure. Other than that, I wouldn't do much. I think I would more focus on a technical part here. On this one, nothing to add. It's natural. It's lovely saturation. The crop is nice. The colors are nice. The shadows and highlights are nicely done here. So on this one, well done. So Dr. Moshe, thank you very much for sending us your photos. It's always a pleasure to see them. If you have more, make sure you send them in the future. Keep an eye on the camera settings. That's something I would start with, and send us more picture when you can. Okay, and the next photographer is called Elizabeth. Elizabeth, we have 2 images from you, so let's jump straight into it. Elizabeth, looking at the first one, we have a landscape here with a very dramatic sky, and then we have this really nice winter Christmas feel capture right here. So Elizabeth, we'll start from here, and the kind of first thing which really strikes me is lots of sensor dust and these kind of little dots all over it. If you're looking for how to remove them, it's really simple, and there is a little video under the description where you can find out how to do it. For example, when it comes to Lightroom here, there is a tool called a healing brush, and then they have a visualize spot option, and once you click on that, it kind of shows you the spot all over the image, so you can go one by one and kind of remove them and take them away from the image, because it's a lovely capture, but this obviously takes lots of attention away from the result, and I think it's a little bit of a shame. So let's just have a look at it here, and here, and again here, and there we are. So a little bit of work done there, but it can kind of help the overall feel after. Obviously you have a lot here coming up, so it almost seems like you were maybe on a quite high f-stop. So let's have a look on the camera settings, and we start like that. So first of all, ISO 400, f16 1/200 of a second. So looking at the scene itself, it doesn't seem to be that low light for you to have to go for the ISO 400. Also, as there is not really a movement on the picture, there are no animals or no people, the shutter speed could have been a little bit slower. You can usually go as far as 1/50th of a second without the handshake starts to show, so that's something for the future. And also with the f-stop, you could go much lower. Looking at it and seeing that really there are no big imminent foreground elements, nothing is as close to the lens, you could easily go to f7, 8, 9 in this case, and then again you would lower the f-stop and you could go down with the ISO. Also, when you go for the higher f-stop, the higher the number is, more of the sensor dust comes out. That's just how it is, that's how it works. Obviously you must have fair bit on your camera anyway, looking at how much noise is visible, but when the f-stop is higher, it shows even more. So a little bit of work to be done there. So definitely go for lower ISO. The smaller it is, the less noise you add. You can see it specifically in the sky itself that there is a little bit more added in the digital noise coming from the actual ISO. And then the sensor does something you can remove in Lightroom, but you can minimize it with lower f-stop and then remove it again in the Lightroom or any other photo editing application. Looking at this picture, we are again looking at the settings. ISO 320, f2.4, 1/60th of a second. So the shutter speed is fine here. 1/60th of a second is fair enough. f2.4 is really low in this case, and I wonder if maybe the reason why it's so low is to be able to capture the image and kind of avoid any shake. So that's fine as well. And obviously again, ISO 320 will add additional noise. I'm looking at it and it almost seems like you use a phone in this case, so I understand that the setting there is a little bit difficult, but you can see how with that kind of settings, for example, when I look at this part of the roof, it almost doesn't end, it kind of just blends with the actual sky, and then similarly here again it kind of blends in. So that's one thing it does. It also creates this kind of black halo around the actual trees. When you look at it from a little bit apart, you see how there are kind of darker parts around the tree. So something to kind of keep an eye on. Most of the Samsungs have a manual setting, so try to kind of play around with that. Other than that, technically, I mean, it's all sharp. The glow is quite nice, and it's nothing really that wrong with it. Just kind of looking at the halos would be one thing, and looking at the settings would be another. So this was a Canon, this was a Samsung mobile phone. Okay, now moving at the composition. So the leading line of this is really nice, but then I would follow the idea and the rule of if the element doesn't add anything to the composition, don't place it there. And I think in this case it's really clear. There is way too much sky, which doesn't really have any crazy texture. There is not like a light ray going through or anything. It's just a gradient going all the way through. And then there is a little bit on the top, but that it's so far that it takes the attention away. So I would definitely crop it much more down. Let's see if we can just make this a little bigger. Perfect. So maybe to something like this. Let's see, 16 on 19, and maybe really more like this. And suddenly we're focusing on the main subject. We have this nice foreground here and just enough sky to kind of see the whole picture. So this is what I would do with it, and then it kind of works. I have my foreground, I have nice light, and I have the rock being the main subject. Very nice. Going on this one, just keep an eye on the geometry, making sure everything is straight. So I would always go and try to click on auto. So that's kind of inline everything for us. And then other than that, I think it works. I think the leading line of the road is nice. The rock here, the lovely light works as well. The tree, the warmth in combination with the cool blue creates really nice contrast as well, and in overall, Elizabeth, this is a lovely photo. So for composition, well done here. Now when it comes to post-processing on both images, so this one we already mentioned, I would definitely try to remove the sensor dust. That would be first thing I would do. Again, I've done some of them, but there is more work to be done, and actually once you get into it, it's quite fast. As you can see, just kind of keep clicking and keep removing. You can even remove multiple at the same time when they're just next to each other, and you can do something like this. So there you have it. This is what you can do right here. Next thing I would do, I would open a little bit more of the shadows, because you're almost losing some of the details in these areas. So you can just go into the light and open the shadows a little bit more, maybe to something like this, just to keep an eye on it. Also a little bit more exposure would probably help as well. That way we also get the foreground a little bit more visible, and it's just nice. Finally, I would do a little bit of local adjustments. So for example, I could place a gradient up here and just darken it, and that way I'm creating kind of natural vignette, again adding the contrast and focus on the main subject on the rock. On this one, there isn't really actually much to add. I would have a look at the white balance, which seems to be quite all right in this case. So I can just kind of pop into the snow, and then I can just kind of lower it. So something like this would help. I don't know how much you could do with the halo as well, knowing that it's a mobile phone picture. Sometimes we are a little bit limited on what we can do, but in overall, maybe you could increase a little bit of the exposure and maybe keep an eye on your whites and darks, which are really kind of heavy. So maybe if we would open again the shadows just a little bit, you could get something like this. A little vignette always helps to create again a little bit more focus, but in overall it's a lovely picture, and both of them are great. So here are a few tips on what you could do with them, and I hope it is going to be helpful. So Elizabeth, take care, and until next time, make sure you send us more pictures in the future. Moving on, next we have Fotini. Fotini, we have one image from you, kind of very cringy, contrasty, black and white capture with very dominant foreground element. So let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at the camera. And sadly, we don't have a camera setting, so we can't tell you much about that. But let's talk about from what we see. So there is a fair bit of noise, but that could be also grain, which you maybe added in post-processing. So I can't really say much there. When I look at the sky, what I can tell you is that there is a kind of combination of different parts with different textures. Specifically, at this part, you can see how it goes from smooth to being really textured, again to smooth. So I'm not 100% sure what's happening there. There is a lots of heavy contrast going on, which is fine. I think the foreground is a little bit dominant, but other than that, technically still coming to it is it's sharp. The highlights, shadows, there is a texture in the sky. So in overall, it's a good capture. Talking about composition, I think the foreground is a little bit dominant towards the rest of the image, and I think if I would want to make it even more powerful, I would try to see if I could position myself so something more interesting could be actually in the frame of it. So I don't know, could you have moved a little bit more and maybe have the church in the center? It's just a suggestion rather than how you had to do it, but I think it would be really nice, since you have this really nice frame, to have something more interesting in it would make it a little bit more powerful. This way it's just a continuation of the same landscape, and there could be more work done with it. So that's about it. Composition wise, it's interesting, it's a nice idea. I would just maybe look for a little bit different angle, and I would do 2-3 step backs to get a little bit of extra space on the edges of it. Now, talking about post-processing, it is what it is. It's heavy, contrasty, rough, black and white image. One thing I would keep an eye on, once you really push the image like this, you start to get, first of all, halos and glows around a specific part of the images. Specifically here, you can see the kind of glow, white glow here as well, also around the ball. So that's one thing to keep an eye. Next thing to keep an eye is the texture and a noise. As I say, it kind of combines. You get a different here, different and smooth sky here, and then another texture here. So again, something to kind of keep an eye on, and making sure that it all looks a little bit natural. But in overall, Fotini, thank you very much for sending us the picture. It was great to see it. Few tips, I hope it's going to be helpful. If you have more images, make sure you send them in the future. Moving on to the next photographer, we have Greg. Greg back with more train photography, and this time interior and then front view right here. Greg, let's have a look at it. This one, absolutely love. Stunning picture. I love the interior of it, very romantic. Just as I always say, I'm a big fan of train photography. Moving on this one, blue sky, nice kind of smoke, a little bit of a shame that the flags are cut off a little bit here. I think if you could have positioned yourself a little bit differently, it would be helpful. Lots of green again as well. We're gonna look at the white balance, but in overall, again, very lovely image. So let's have a look at it. Starting here, let's have a look at the settings. Nikon D5300, your settings ISO 200, f5 100 of the second. So obviously a little lower situation, trying to keep it under control. ISO 200 is fine. I don't see any excessive noise coming up anywhere. There is a little bit, obviously, specifically in the darker areas, but in overall, I think it's well handled. F5 is on the lower side, but I assume that that was the keep hand on the shutter speed, which 100 of the second is probably fine. I assume the train was stand still at the moment, so you could have probably go as far as 1/50th of a second. That's usually a good number to avoid any shakes, depending on the camera. But in overall, I think technically it's nicely done. Nice, it's sharp. The level of detail outside is well done. The exposure is well done as well here. No extra noise. Lovely glow from the lamppost. So well done there. Looking at this one, looking at your settings again, Nikon D200, ISO 100, so spot on there. F11 makes sense with the kind of settings. 1/750th of a second, your shutter speed, which probably makes sense. I would need to know how the train was moving, how fast, and so on. So as long as everything is sharp the way it is, you get a nice smoke here. I think in overall it works. Composition, I think when you're talking about this tunnel view, you always want to make sure everything is nice and centered. So let's have a look at it. I think I would keep an eye on geometry again. I think looking at the cropping, the aisle is in the center, so that's always good to start with. And then looking at the geometry, let's just quickly try auto and see what that does. It helps a little bit. Let's see before and after. You can either use the auto, so it does this, or you could just use the guided and maybe just kind of keep an eye on the other line. Let's do something like this and something maybe like this, just to make sure that everything is balanced there, and then go with that. Other than that, I think the leading line, the view outside, the kind of story coming through the train. I think it works. Don't have much to add. Love it. I think there is just enough space above, below. I think the kind of when the camera tilt little works as well. Not much wrong there. In overall, well done, Greg. Talking about this one, I already mentioned about the flag. I think that's one thing. Another thing is, I think if you would have been more into the angle, we would see more of the train. I think in this case, you really only focus on the first part of the train and the rest is kind of behind, hidden a little bit. I think looking at it like this, yeah, it's it has some opportunities of what could be done with it, and I think we're gonna talk more about it in the post-processing, but just kind of I think the flags takes lots of attention away, and especially kind of cutting them away. I think with flags it's never really a great idea, so just something to kind of think of for the future. Post-processing, nothing I would add here. It's perfect. I think great colors, great shadows, highlights. I already showed you what I would do with the geometry just to make sure. The level of details outside is great. Well done there. So this one is spot on. Moving on this one. So first of all, looking at here, I can see that there is some parts of the trees going through and the fog is kind of missing behind them. So if you're adding the fog in post-processing on this one, you need to make sure that it's not visible, and here I think it is a little bit. And then also when I look at this part of the image at the back, there is also something going on here. There are some kind of artifacts which are kind of hidden a little bit. So I'm wondering if you've done maybe some sky replacement as well here. I have no problem with sky replacement at all. I think when it's done right, it can really make your picture pop out, but you really need to make sure that it kind of work. Again, just kind of looking at it, it's these artifacts which are probably the most visible, and then on the fog itself, it's the kind of view through the trees which is a little bit visible as well. Also the smoke itself together with the rest of the image, the colors don't really match. One way to do it, Greg, is in Photoshop or wherever you do your sky replacement. Once you add all these elements, it's really important to place another layer over it and add some kind of color filter to it. So I don't know, warming, cooling, and what it usually does, it melts all of it together, where once you just add these elements, sometimes they have a very specific color white balance between them, and when you look at them all together with a fresh pair of eyes, it's a bit visible. So that's just something for the future. So let's just quickly, once we're here, what could we do? I think I would crop it a little bit tighter, just something like this, without the lock, maybe here, and actually even here. So that would be one thing I would do. I would have a look at the white balance again. Let's see what auto would do. And I think by adding a little bit extra yellow and removing some of the green, I think that helps as well. Again, if you would kind of struggle with the white balance, in this case, when it kind of all needs to work together, it's always good to go for black and white, because that challenge disappear altogether, and then it's something to kind of keep an eye on, but we don't want to do that. Definitely I would add some kind of local adjustment here, because it's all very much flat, so maybe little linear gradient at this part of the image and just bring the exposure down to do maybe more something like this. Also the smoke seems to be very flat, it's a kind of same color all the way through, so you could add another brush maybe at this part of the image, bring down the exposure and maybe paint in some contrast into it to make it just a little bit more interesting to do maybe something like this. And that's about it. So plenty to kind of think about. The first image, excellent, nothing to add. And then on this one, just a few things to keep an eye on and making sure that it all works together. Greg, thank you so much for sending your pictures. It's always a pleasure to see them. I can't wait to see more of them in the near future. Moving on to the next photographer, we had Guido and two images. So let's jump straight into it. Let's have a look at them. So very kind of Christmas, winter, festive feel of this one, with lots of glow, very kind of complicated, dark, low light situation. And on this one, lovely bridge over some kind of river with a frozen effect, with a lovely texture in the sky. Very, very nice image. So let's talk about them. Let's start by looking at this one and let's see if we have a details of the camera. And you're using Nikon Z6. And let's have a look at your settings. So ISO 5000, f8, 1/50th of a second. So we'll start from the back. 1/50th of a second, unless you had a tripod on you at this light, that's probably as slow as you can go to be able to hold it. So well done on you there. Obviously 1/50th of a second, you will get some blur on the people depending how fast they go and in which distance. f8 is a good choice for this picture. Obviously this gate being quite close, f8 is a good choice. I would go maybe even a little bit higher, but then we go to the ISO, and the ISO 5000 will be visible regardless what camera you're using. And obviously once you go to the certain point, it will start to remove the sharpness on the image, remove the colors, and everything will start to look very soft in overall. So I think that's the case when I look at the cathedral itself. It kind of start to be pixelated, the colors kind of blend together. And when you look into the sky, you can see lots of the noise, not only noise by not only noise as a grain, but also noise as a color. So it's a little bit visible there, but still good attempt, just difficult situation to shoot. Yeah, I mean, obviously for this one, if you would want to photograph it, I would bring the tripod or at least monopod, so you can go with the shutter speed lower and you can avoid some of the ISO and lower it to as little as possible. Talking about this one and looking at your camera settings, again, Nikon Z6, ISO 3200, f8, 1/80th of a second. Now, with looking at the picture, looking at the colors and the sky and everything, it should be quite kind of simpler situation to handle for the camera. So the ISO 3200 seems to be still quite high. So I wonder why. Again, when you kind of zoom in, you can start to see it a little bit. It's not as visible as on the first image. And that's also because most of the time the noise kind of pop up in the darker areas of the image. Other than that, the setting is right. f8 works, 1/80th of a second works as well. So maybe it was a little bit darker than it's visible on the image. If you want to tell me more about it, make sure you hit it in the comments so I can understand more about what was the idea with the settings. Now with f8, you can see a little bit of blur and softness in this part of the image, where this part and the bridge is all sharp. When I look at this, it starts to be a little bit softer. Let's see on the other side a little bit as well, specifically when you go towards the corner. Now composition, it's a lovely idea with the church being placed in the actual walkthrough, so I think that works quite nicely. Obviously shame for this thing here. Also, it would be quite nice to try to get it without the people, maybe covering the Christmas tree and so on. So as a composition idea, I think it works super well. I just think that it would need a little bit more patience to make sure that you avoid the people and that you maybe position the church a little bit more towards the side like here, so then it works. You could also maybe do a few steps back if it would have been possible and get more of the reflection of the gate, which would create another lovely effect. But in overall, great idea, Guido. Nicely done and well done there. Now talking about this one, composition wise, I love this. I think it's great. I think it's a great kind of leading line, great flow of the image, lovely texture in the sky, nice tree, nice details. The frozen really works here. It really makes you think about winter. I love this one when it comes to composition. Moving finally on the post-processing, let's stay with this one. Again, keep an eye on the noise, which is mostly visible in the sky itself. Obviously, you can always have a look at the noise in the details and see if maybe a little bit of noise reduction and color noise reduction would help. Just a touch to start from there. And always also check your white balance with the auto, but in this case, I think you were quite spot on. So good there. I would add a little bit more contrast just to push it a little bit more, and then maybe in the details or effects add a little vignette there, which helps also to the sky and helps to bring more contrast and focus to the bridge itself. Now moving on this one, again similarly in the details you could push a little bit the noise reduction. I never go above 20 because then it starts to really make the picture soft, but you could push the color noise reduction to go maybe somewhere here. And other than that, it's nicely done. With the white balance is nice. The church is visible. I think that, yeah, in overall, Guido, just here is where I would work more on technical part. On this one, I would just leave it. I think it's a great capture. So in overall, well done. Thank you so much for sending us the pictures. Love them. Can't wait to see more of them in the future. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a John. John, we have 2 images from you this week. So let's have a look at them. So let's do this and let's have a look at it. So we have this lovely kind of texture and element rocks in front of the sea with the beautiful kind of background. And then we have this beach with the cactusy plants and lots of drama happening in the sky and in the sea itself. So let's talk about it. Let's have a look. Starting with the first image right here. Look at the settings. Camera Z6, ISO 160, f8, 100 of a second. When it comes to settings, absolutely spot on. For this type of light situation, for this type of composition and scene, perfect setting. Well done, John. So great there. Obviously, lots of details, no noise, lovely exposure, just great in overall, technically well handled, great light again. Maybe what time was it? 11 o'clock, maybe. Shame that the light wasn't a little bit more interesting, but in overall, John, well done. Talking about this one, again, looking at your settings, same camera, ISO 100, f8, 1/200 of a second. Again, spot on. Obviously, if you would want it, artistic decision comes to 1/200 of a second, captures the waves and everything in a kind of frozen mode. If you would have gone for something a little bit slower, you could get more kind of movement and smoothness into the sea, but totally up to you. 2 different options, depending on what you want to do. It's your choice, and I think it works. So both of them technically well done. The camera setting is spot on. So well done there. Now, composition wise, there's a lot of this happening here in compared to the top. I just wish we had a little bit more space on the top. So I think if we would have just cropped it a little bit more like this, it's maybe too much. Let's say maybe just like this. Suddenly it started to be a little bit more balanced. I think if you have seen landscape pictures before where there is just a little bit of the sky left on the top, I think that's the case. I know that this is your main subject, but in that case, maybe I would have gone a little bit further or widened the lens and try to capture more of everything. Now, let me show you the moment I kind of crop the bottom a little bit and I get more of the top, suddenly it becomes so much more balanced and so much more natural. So that would be one thing. Other than that, as a foreground, I think it really works. It creates a flow and then it kind of continues through the bay, and I think it works very, very well. So in overall, composition wise, John, well done. Just a little crop for me, but other than that, good. Now, talking about this one, obviously, you got to talk about the foreground here, which is something which we call high frequency texture. It's a kind of items which are really busy. It creates really busy scene, and it's something really to kind of think of when creating a scene like this. Although the picture has a foreground, middle ground, and background, this takes lots of attention away. So generally you're looking for a little bit simpler subjects, but still it works. It's better than having none. It's just more kind of suggestion for next time. I think these rocks also really help to create depth on the image, and the background works really well as well. The sky has a lot of texture, so in overall, well done on this one too. Now moving on to post-processing, let's stay with this image. It's a kind of combination of green and color, then a darker monotone color and a blue. So just kind of keep an eye on it, keep an eye on your white balance, just to make sure. This is way too much, so obviously you were just about there. The kind of, you see what I mean? These colors are very kind of tuned down. Then you get this tuned down blue, and then you get almost lack of saturation at this part of the image. Just kind of keep an eye on that. Other than that, nothing much I would add here. I think the details, the shadows are well done. It's nicely edited. Nothing much I can add, John. Talking about this one, I really like it. I really like the warmness of it. what I would do, I would just close it a little bit more. I would create the contrast here on the bottom by using the linear gradient. So maybe just something like this. And then again, to just guide the eyes, I would add one more and create the kind of circle gradient and create something like this. And what I'm doing by doing this, I'm basically creating kind of journey. So I'm starting from the dark, coming for the bright, and leading the viewer towards the bay and getting something like this. So John, this is what I would do with it. In overall, great 2 pictures, lovely captures, something a bit different. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. And if you have more, make sure you send them sometimes soon. And the next photographer, Laurie Griezmann. Laurie, let's have a look at your photos. One right here with the lovely autumn colors, and one here with the big kind of rocks formation, interesting sky, and lots of kind of big panorama picture right there. So let's have a look at them. Starting with this one right here, let's have a look at the settings. So we are on ISO 400, f9, 1/250th of a second. Laurie, I'm wondering why going for the ISO 400 in this case, in something what seems to be quite simple, light conditions. 1/250th of a second is quite fast, obviously maybe trying to avoid shake in the leaves themselves, so going for that speed. F9 is quite good, but as always, you know, we're trying to keep it as low as possible just for yourself, just to make sure that you try to avoid any noise in all parts of the image. I would be going for as close as 100. And in the order to do it, I would keep an eye on the shutter speed. You can pretty much go as far as 1/50th of a second and still avoid any handshake. And it's just something to kind of think of for the future and for the next time. Other than that, kind of looking at it, it's interesting light. Even though it seems quite bright, the shadows are quite nice and diffused. So well done on that. Lots of details. So well done there. Nice colors. So in overall, technically quite well handled. Now, when we're looking at this picture, let's have a look at the settings first. ISO 100, so spot on there. F8, and then 1/250th of a second, the shutter speed. Now, first thing which strikes me on this is that really the only part which seems to be in focus is the grass here in the foreground, and then the sky itself. Everything in between, including the rock, the way I'm looking at the picture, and I don't know if it's maybe the way it was transferred into the JPEG or export, but everything else seems to be really soft and like in the details, it's almost going towards being kind of blurry. So something to kind of really keep an eye on. Although your setting is spot on with the ISO 100, excellent. Really, I think it's a shame that your main subject isn't in focus and it takes a lot away. And I think also it's a bit confusing the fact that you have only the very small foreground in focus. Then your middle ground is soft. And then your sky is, again, focus. It's a bit confusing altogether. So just something to keep an eye on for the future. Definitely having your focusing point on the camera set up on the make subject, number 1. And number 2, always make sure that it's nice and sharp. Moving on the composition. This one is very nice. I think it's just a little bit of shame that the path is a little bit more visible. It just kind of starts and then it disappears and then it appears again. Usually with the path, it works a little bit better when you see more continuing flow of it. It's still very, very nice. With the stone being here, I would have either gone a little bit more towards the side and used the whole stone as a foreground, or the other way around. So that way the stone kind of little bit of it disappear and I still see the path behind, because of the stone and of its color and the lack of anything here, it's a touch of unbalance. Still a lovely idea. Again, I would go down a little bit with the camera to see more of this part, and I would just try to position myself to the point where I can see more of the path flowing through continuously rather than disappearing and then appearing again. That would be the one thing. Other than that, I think it works quite well. To be honest, when it comes to composition, I would probably crop a little bit of the top because it's kind of repetition of the same things. And depending what you want to do with the camera, this crop is quite good for things like a Facebook story or so on, but it would be a bit tricky to print. So I would maybe just crop it to maybe something like this, which is much easier for the human eye to consume it, and it's just kind of make it easier to be printed and so on. So that's about it. I think it's lovely. I think the kind of tunnel created by the tree looks great. I love the colors, and the overall feel of the image is just really, really nice. On this one, when it comes to composition, I think it's actually very well done. I think this creates really nice foreground. It adds a really nice depth of field. And then our main subject, if we would skip over the fact that they are a little bit soft, it would be quite lovely. I think it's well done. The sky looks good with all the textures and the colors. It's nice. Just coming back to the fact that the main subject really needs to be in focus. And then moving on the post-processing. So you saw what I would do here with the kind of cropping. That would be maybe just one thing, and the rest I would leave it. I mean, you know me, I always like to add a little bit of vignette just to close the tunnel in overall, but that's about it. I think it's nice. Yeah, you could do a little bit of extra dodge and burn with your brush and bring down the exposure and maybe just kind of create a little bit more contrast in some areas of the image just to make it a little bit more interesting, but that's about it. On this one, specifically this part, all the way through seems to be just a little bit flat, means that there is no really difference in light. So there is lack of light creating a contrast and a depth. So I don't know, there are different things you could do. Again, you could use the local adjustments with the masking and maybe just kind of create little gradient here. And then you could create another one from the top of the picture and again, bring it a little bit down. You could create another one and use a radial gradient and kind of really point towards the main rock to do something like this, and then with the brush kind of finish the work again, maybe just do a little bit of the darker areas here and here. So maybe something like this. Also what I would do in post-processing, I would probably turn down a little bit the clarity, maybe just for the sky now when I think about it. So I would just another plus and I would choose clear, select the sky. So it kind of select the sky for me. And then I bring down the clarity, and that way I get a little bit more softness in the sky, which looks just a little bit more natural compared to this really, really sharp sky, which I think, again, is a little bit unnatural. So I would go more for something like this, which kind of adds the glow, make it a little bit more natural, and make it a little bit nicer. Laurie, either way, thank you very much for sending the photos. This is a incredible subject. Just keep an eye on the sharpness. This is interesting, just kind of learning for next time for the leading line. You want it to be there all the way through so the human eyes can follow it, and it even more kind of increase the feeling of the depth and everything. Anyway, thank you again for sending your photos. Take care, and I hope to see more of them in a near future. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Melissa Miles. Melissa, we have 2 images from you. Both of them kind of forest, foliage, woodland photography. Very nice work, actually. I really like what you're doing here. The combination of colors, textures, elements, simplifying the things, working with the contrast, color contrast, I think works very well. So let's have a look at them. So looking at this one, let's have a look if we have any details when it comes to technical part. Yes, so you're using Nikon Z7, ISO 100, f8, 1/60th of a second. So the ISO is good, f8 is good as well. I think it makes complete sense. 1/60th of a second is a good shutter speed to make sure that everything is nice and sharp, even handheld. So altogether, a lovely, lovely capture and technically very well done. Again, I like the level of the details. I like the kind of exposure, it's well balanced, the colors, the sharpness. There is kind of not really a lack of any details or overall noise. So well done altogether. Technically, I think it's very well set. Now looking at this one, again, similarly, we were on ISO 100, f18 2/5 of the second. Now on this one, I would be quite interested to know why you went for the f18. What was the thought behind? If you have a moment, make sure you comment under the video here on the channel so we can I can more understand what you were trying to do. In overall, still I think technically very well done. I love the colors, I love the details all the way through, with a little bit of depth at the back, even with the f18, which is quite nice. The light is nice as well. It's kind of nice and diffused. You're getting a little bit of movement here, obviously with the 2/5 of the second it happens, but still in overall very well done. But what really stands out on your picture is the way you manage the composition and the way you manage the work with the light and contrast and color. And I think that's something what really stands out for you, Melissa. This is great, excellent. The tree again being separated like this, I think creates beautiful, beautiful scene, and it just works. On this one again, the fact that this tree standing out, being it placed on a kind of different color and different warmth of the background works super well. The green as well, even though it looks quite complicated, it's kind of simple, and I think it works well again. So both of them, well done. Post-processing wise, I would leave this one. I think it's spot on, Melissa. On this one, I would maybe darken the sides a little bit more. That's just me, you know, by using maybe masking and a little gradient. You could just bring it down a little. Maybe I would also bring down the saturation a little, just to again increase the focus on the center of the image. You can simply just add one more linear gradient here and do pretty much the same thing. And that's about it. Melissa, both of the pictures are super nice. Well done. Thank you for sharing them with us. And if you have more, make sure you send them over. We would love to see them in the future. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Mr. Dreamer, and we have two long exposure captures here. Both of them very much a seascape, coastal images. So let's talk about what we have here. Starting with this one, first impression, really nice. I love the bridge, love the sky, love the kind of sea working together, the leading line created. In overall, great capture. Then looking at this image right here, also very, very nice scene, kind of long exposure sky right here with lots of colors, lots of texture in it. Nice leading line created by the coast. Again, the path works quite well as well. So let's jump at it and let's look at the settings we have here. So looking first at the setting. So you're using Canon, ISO 100, f16, 1/80th of a second. So ISO 100, good setting. f16 is quite high for what you see. There is not really a big depth of field visible. And obviously by going f16 you slow down a little bit of the shutter speed, but not crazily. The sea is a little bit softer. There is some of the movement kind of captured with the longer exposure, but I think in overall it's quite good. The colors specifically all the way from here to the back are a little bit flat and a little bit desaturated, if you know what I mean. When I'm looking at the foreground, they are nice and vibrant and really sharp, and then once you travel through the image, you can see how you're getting just a little bit of washed out effect, and then once you get all the way to the back, it's kind of visible quite a fair bit. So that's just something to kind of keep an eye on for the future, on to see how you could maybe do something with that. The sky is quite nice. I think the kind of leading lines works here as well. It just helps to really push the leading line here. The exposure is good, so well done there. Technically on this one, ISO 100, f16, 100th of a second. Maybe if you have a moment, you can in a comment let me know why you're going for the f16, or what's the kind of idea behind. And it's just something to kind of keep an eye on. f16 is quite high, and usually it brings extra artifacts, like for example the sensor dust, which you can see here and here as well. It can be really easily removed by using this healing brush here. Just really kind of make it the right size and then hit it, and not like this. There was one more here, I think. And let's see, that's about it. So that's just something to keep an eye on. And it's kind of, for this kind of landscape situation, it's maybe a bit unusual. But in overall, again, it's sharp. There is quite nice depth of the field into it. I like the colors on this, the contrast is nice as well, and the overall exposure, I think it's well done as well. So technically both of them very well done. Just a few things to kind of keep an eye on. Composition wise, I think this one is spot on, except I would probably remove a little bit of the sky. I think there's way too much of it. I would have gone more for kind of panoramic view, maybe to go for something like this, which I think is much more powerful. Then I would keep an eye on the geometry of the image. So keep an eye here and maybe try the auto and see if that would help. Well, that's way too much. So let's see if we could help it like this. And I think this just kind of sorts the bridge a little bit and make it more natural. And in overall, I think this is just a little bit stronger than what you've done, but still very well done there. And similarly here, I like a beautiful dramatic sky and powerful sky, but I think you don't have to keep that much of it there. Again, I would go for the 16 on 9 and maybe just go down a little and see the path. Let's see if we would kind of take it away and just do something like this. It's also an option. It's always good to try to kind of move it around and see what works the best and what's creating more impact. Anyway, in overall, the main leading line here works really well. I think the sky is beautiful. Again, adding a leading line. The foreground, middle ground, background works as well. So altogether, composition wise, both of them very well done and a good job. Talking about post-processing, yeah, the colors is one thing you kind of need to keep an eye on and see if you could do something about it. What about your white balance? Let's just check it out. Obviously, this was the kind of original, so we gotta keep it the way it was. Maybe a little bit of vignette would be helpful just to add a little bit more focus in the center of the image. On this one, there is a kind of fair bit of noise in the sky. You could add a little vignette to do something like this. And then with the brush, you could maybe add a little bit of a kind of local adjustments to do maybe more like this. And again, highlight the actual leading line and work with that. In overall, Mr. Dreamer, lovely example of two seaside photos, the kind of coastal trip, well documented. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And I hope to see more of your pictures in the future. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Peter Duncan. Peter, we have a, let's have a look. Two pictures, I believe. 1, 2. I wonder what's the difference. Let's have a look. Here it's a RAW file. Here it's a JPEG. So obviously, let's see if we can see at least the settings here. No, so that's fine. They both looks the same. So let's talk about it. Let's have a look at them. Starting with this one, let's have a look at the technical details. You use Canon to capture it. ISO 100, f11, 100 of a second. Absolutely spot on settings right there for you. Nothing I can add. Obviously, trying to keep the ISO as close to 100 is always a good thing. F11 for this kind of scene, making sure that everything is sharp all the way through is always a good idea. And 100 of a second, probably based on what the camera tells you, everything is nicely exposed. The work of light works really well here. The shadows and highlights, everything is well visible, so well done there. Including nice texture in the sky with a touch of noise. Is a little bit of a shame, but still in overall, well done. Talking about this one, obviously Isle of Skye, I lived there for several years, so excellent location. I know exactly where you've been with this one, so well done on capturing it. Beautiful dramatic sky there, so that works really well as well. Looking at your settings, ISO 125, f8, 1/160th of a second. Again, setting spot on. You're getting a fair bit of noise in the sky, which is strange with the low ISO you're using. So I'm wondering how much you underexposing, if maybe that's something to do with that. But in overall, again, great light work here and here. The light was already quite decent and a beautiful capture of the Isle of Skye. Great vibrant colors. So technically, again, very well done here. Now, talking about Talking about composition, you a little bit missing a foreground element here, and that's one thing which on Sky is a little bit tricky. Obviously, you cannot go straight into the middle ground and background. The grass could work, but if there would be something there, I think it would add us a little bit more depth of the field. I think it would help just a touch. Other than that, you know, the kind of third of the sky and the light and the contrast of the colors works very, very well. It's just the one thing I would maybe try to look for in the future would be the foreground element, which is still one of the hardest things to find when it comes to landscape photography. Now on this one, I would crop it a little bit tighter. So I would do maybe something, let's see if we unlock this, if we would go more towards this. Again, maybe there is not a clear foreground, but you could say that you kind of get the different depth from these elements and then this element and the sky, and then I think it helps the view of the island and the back. So overall, together with the leading line, this is probably stronger composition, incredible photo. Again, the leading line here as well, leading you towards the main subject, towards the beautiful sky. Well done. Post-processing, to be honest, absolutely nothing to add. This is exactly my style. I love the saturation. I love the drama. I love the light. It's just great. Excellent work. Well done, Peter. It's great to see your pictures. If you have more, please make sure you send them over to us. It's always good to see them. And until next time, bye-bye. Moving on, the next photographer, Phyllis. We have 4 pictures from you. We only have a time for 2 today, but we can see more of them in the future. If you have a time, send them for the next week, and we'll be happy to talk about them. So let's talk about this one because I love this one. Maybe not this one, but we can definitely look at this one, for example. Okay, so we're going to be looking at those 2 pictures, and let's talk about it. Beautiful colors, beautiful sunset, sunrise colors. There is a little bit of artifacts happening here, probably to do with the size of the image. Let's have a look. It's a JPEG, and it doesn't show really what size was it, but that's fine. Let's talk about the technical part of the image. Starting here, Nikon D850, ISO 200, f5.6, 1/5 of the second. Now, ISO 200, obviously, as always, just a kind of suggestion, we always try to keep it as close as 100 as possible, depending what the situation was, what was your camera, did you have a tripod, monopod, and so on. I'm assuming with 1/5 of a second, keeping everything sharp, you probably had to have a tripod. Maybe you were trying to kind of go for some texture in the water and making sure the bird is straight. Either way, yep, the suggestion is always close to 100. f5.6, again, probably working with the exposure, making sure everything working out, because in this type of scene, I would probably go more towards 7, 8. That's about it. That's about the right direction. And then depending on the situation of your settings, you need to choose the shutter speed. In overall, I like the fact that this is all sharp, so I'm happy about this. Obviously, the blur on the boat is there, but that's fine. Beautiful texture in the sky, beautiful colors in the sky. Still a little bit of texture in the water, which is really nice. I think some people overdo it, and then you just get this kind of white films, where I think this just really works. So in overall, very well done. Then talking about this one, sadly it doesn't have any information, so let's just kind of go by what we see. So there are details on the foreground here on the beach. There are details all the way through the image, which is really good. The sun itself, if I go into the light and see your whites, when I go all the way down, it seems a little bit burned out, to be honest. So when I bring the whites down all the way and then I try to open the highlights, if it's still burned out, oh no, there are some details maybe. So something like this you can get. This is what I'll be going for. You're obviously always trying to create keep as much details in the sun as possible. Still, it's nice. The colors are lovely. We can talk about it in composition to see what could be done a little bit differently, but in overall still very nice feel of the image. The light is very nice, the details are good, the exposure is good, so well done there. Now talking about composition on this one, I wouldn't do much. I would probably crop away the boat because it's blurry anyway, so I would just do this, and then it becomes so much kind of simpler. There is a lack of distraction there, and then you're really focusing just on this kind of pear or leftover and the colors. And I think this picture is stunning. Well done there. Now, talking about this one, I would first make sure that my horizon is straight, which can be really easily done by just by the geometry. Let's see this one and this one. So that way we have a straight horizon, and or you can always do it in a cropping tool, you know, just making sure that everything is the way it should be. I would also crop it a little bit tighter because I think there are parts of the image on a side which maybe we don't need as much, specifically the sky. I think there's a lot of blue which doesn't add anything to the image in overall. Equally the beach here, I think a little bit of it has to stay there to add the depth, but I think like this is still as strong, and we getting a little bit closer to the sun, and we're really focusing just on the things which are important. Phyllis, when it comes to post-processing, I think this one is spot on. Great white balance, great light work, lovely shadows and highlights, in overall excellent picture. One of my favorite this week. Looking at this one, I think what I would have gone for a little bit longer exposure to make the water a little bit more smooth, because I think the foreground is just a little bit distracting. I think talking about this kind of really calm and peaceful scene, it would have worked if it would be just a little bit smoother. Still, in overall, I think it's well done. It's lovely natural, the colors are natural, the sun has a lovely burst. In overall, great capture. So Phyllis, thank you very much for sharing it with us. Take care and send us more pictures in the future if you can. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a Richard Pullen. Richard, Seascape Photography. Now, this one is great. Lovely sky, little bit of long exposure, obviously with the boats being in the foreground, creating a really nice scene, powerful scene. Excellent. Now, on this one, it's a little bit crazy, to be honest. Lots of purple and lots of noise as well. So let's jump to it. Let's have a look at this one first. Let's have a look at the settings. Canon M50, ISO 400, f20, 1/13 of a second. Now for 400 ISO, you're getting crazy amount of noise in the kind of darker areas. Like when you zoom in, this is a combination of your kind of optical noise as well as color noise, really taking lots of attention away from your picture. Then this foreground also, for the same reason, really being kind of crazy purple pixelated effect. So a little bit of a shame, because it's a great composition, great idea, great sky, but it's just, yeah, the capture is a little bit of a shame because it takes lots away. So obviously, coming to your settings, ISO 100 for scene like this is a must to keep as much noise away as possible. f20, for this case, you don't need to go anywhere more than f9, f7. There is no immediate close subject towards the camera, so the camera has all the way through to capture everything nice and sharp, and it would have been fine. And then 1/13 of a second, I would have set up my ISO, my f-stop, and then let the camera tell me what's the ideal shutter speed, and then I would make sure that I just underexpose a little bit to make sure that I have all my details on the sky. Now, to double make sure, I would maybe capture the picture with bracketing, so you have 1 plus 1 minus, and then you come home and you have all the details you need. In this case, it's just, yeah, it's overwhelming. The colors, the noise, and the color, it takes lots away from what otherwise probably was a brilliant scene and brilliant picture. Now, coming back to this one, which is excellent. Let's have a look. There is settings here. ISO 100, there you go, brilliant. f5.6, probably again, the golden spot for most lenses are between 7.1 and 11. That's where most of the lenses for the cameras these days perform the best. You don't get softness in edges, you don't get heavy vignetting, so try to go for the f7.1 next time, because the shutter speed probably still had the opportunity to go with. I understand that you want to make sure that the boats stay nice and sharp, which they did, so well done on that. And this is a great example of where you could use the bracketing, have one picture, capture it for the boats to make sure they are sharp, have another picture to make sure you have details all the way through. Richard, anyway, technically this one is spot on. So there is a big difference between the two. again, I think this one is great. Talking about composition, one little thing I think is a shame is that we're missing these boats here in the front, and that this one is also cut off. Obviously, this one would be easy fix. You could just kind of crop it a little bit tighter, bring down a little bit of the horizon, and that would have been it. Here in the front, it's just a shame because the picture would start really nicely with the view. I don't know if you could have done step forward or anything, but that's just one thing. Also, keep an eye on your geometry. You want to make sure that all your buildings and everything is nice and straight. So you can just go into geometry and see if auto would just sort it just a little bit. And that's about it. I think the leading line here, the boats creating really nice depth and flow. Again, the boats here at the background works really well. It's really nice how the sky is kind of traveling in the direction of the photography as well, because in overall, it's a brilliant picture, Richard. Richard, on this one, when it comes to composition, that's what I was saying earlier. I think composition-wise, it's great. I think you have really nice foreground here. You have the main subject here and then really heavy sky, but technically tricky capture. You could obviously capture it and crop it more as a panorama, which I think for this would work great. Again, I would keep an eye on the geometry for this one. And again, just making sure everything is straight. But the composition-wise, great eye. I would change nothing on this. And then finally, post-processing. Let's not talk about this one. Let's talk about this one. Once everything is straight, when it's cropped properly, always a vignette is a good idea just to close the picture a little bit. And then a little bit of dodge and burn, you know, just to kind of maybe add a little bit more contrast on the boats. So something like this is always a good idea. Maybe at the back as well. And maybe on the buildings. And there you have it. You already have a gradient in the sky, gradient here. So I think in overall, this is a great picture, Richard. So well done. Congratulations on the great capture. Little bit of extra work on this one. But, you know, we live and learn and move on. And definitely, I would suggest if you can go back to location like this and try again and see what you can get. Anyway, if you have more pictures, send them over soon. Until then, take care. Moving on to the next photographer, we have Sabine. Sabine sent us more landscape, or in this case, seaside photos. Sabine was our photographer of the week back in September, I believe, with her pets and dogs captures. And obviously now we're trying different things in landscape photography. Sabine, first impression. Different kind of photography. They both almost monotone. There's a very kind of they are very kind of tuned down when it comes to colors. Composition wise, I think they work quite well. There is a lot happening. The leading lines are there. But let's have a look at them. So starting here, let's have a look at your camera setting. Oh, no camera setting on neither one of them. That's a shame, Sabine. Okay, never mind. Just from what I can see then. So the sharpness seems to be good. So there is still a little bit of the noise coming through. So I wonder what was the ISO used for this one. The sky, the sun is nice and kind of hidden with a glow, which I think works really well for this picture. So that's about as much as I can see here. Here there is a little bit more of the sun coming through with a quite nice sunburst, which I think works very well. What I like here is this kind of leading line here, which I think helps with the depth of the field. But then when I kind of look at this part of the picture, it's a little bit soft. And sometimes this softness again come with the higher ISO. When I shoot with higher ISO, it kind of takes away at certain level, and depending on the number, it takes away the detail and it takes away the colors. So maybe this is the reason why. Also, it could be because of the lower f-stop and maybe your focus point pointing more towards this part of the image. That's about technically as much as I can say without seeing the details, but still that's where we are. Talking about composition on this one, just kind of one thing I can see here, I think maybe that's a sensor dust which can be really easily removed with this kind of healing tool here, just so it doesn't distract us. But other than that, I would go a little bit closer. I think about this much of the image is not necessarily needed there, so I would probably go more to something like this. Let's see if we would do a little bit of the panoramic view. and maybe go more for something like this. This is what I would do. Again, I'm always trying to kind of remove parts which are not necessarily for the composition and do not add anything to the story. And when I crop in like this, I can use this as my foreground, which kind of helps me with the depth of the field. And then I'm focusing on the bikers, which I think works in this case. Again, moving kind of towards them, they are nice and sharp, so that works. But it's just missing a little bit. I think these all makes the foreground a little bit busy, and it's missing something. If, for example, the biker would be somewhere here or here, it would make it a little bit more clear. Also, kind of in overall looking at it, I'm wondering what the main message was, what's the main subject, and what is it you're trying to do there. On this one, composition wise, this one is much more stronger. I think the sun really creates a story. Once again, I would probably crop it a little bit tighter. So once you do something like this, probably using the 16:9, and again placing the kind of, as you can see when I have this on, yeah, you're placing the start of the leading line on your golden point, taking away some of the sun which is not necessarily there, and then I have this leading line. Each of this edge helps us to create a depth, and because there are no bikers, the message is really simple. It's about the beach, it's about the sun, it's about the sea. There is nice texture in the sky, so I think in overall this one is a little bit stronger when it comes to composition. Post-processing, both of them, to be honest, because of the lack of colors, are very much contestants for me for black and white pictures. Simply because they are really wash out anyway, so it would be interesting to try to turn them that way. Let's just have a look at this one. If we would do that, kind of turn it to black and white, push the contrast, create something like this, push the blacks down as well, and then really work with the local adjustment, maybe with the linear gradient, bringing it down like this, and again pushing it down, so you're creating like a really strong, that was way too much, kind of a really strong scene. Similarly, we could do something similar from the bottom here to create a little bit of gradient from the bottom with something like this, and then you can go in and with the brush really kind of highlights the areas which are important for the whole story. Oh no, that was way too much, but something like this and something like this, and then similar again, one more brush, and maybe help to the sea a little bit to create something like this. Again, lower the brush in overall, just something like this, and then you can also help a little bit to the sky, something like this, and again a little bit on the beach, and it would be interesting as well. So kind of before, let's see, before and after. The black and white is interesting as well. I quite like it. Just kind of something to try something different when the colors are maybe not perfect. In overall, it has a nice mood. I quite like them. Out of the two, you could understand that this is my favorite, but still, thank you very much for sending them over, Sabine. Keep shooting. Next time when you send us a picture, try to send them with the details of the camera, so I can tell you a little bit more about what you could do differently. Moving on, next photographer, we have a Stevie. Stevie, I haven't seen pictures from you for quite a while now, so it's good to see you back. I hope you had a good Christmas. Happy New Year to you. And Stevie was our photographer of the week back in the autumn, and we always love to see his pictures. So let's look at what we have this week. Again, we kind of try to do two at the time, so let's just have a look at this one and this one, because I think they are stunning, so we can keep this one for next week. See, this one, beautiful, beautiful, almost your kind of signature look with the lightning, strong scene, again with the kind of pier. Very, very nice. This one, super kind of intensive, dramatic sunset. Again, very nice. Always good. The combination of the warmth and the cool of the water creates a very kind of likable scene. So let's talk about it. Let's have a look at your settings. Nikon D500, ISO 100, f16, 2-second exposure. Spot on settings. Trying to keep the digital noise as low as possible in a lower light situation is always a good point. Touch of softness, to be honest, when I kind of zoom in, specifically in these parts, and some chromatic aberration still left over. at this part of the image. I know you can remove some of it in Lightroom and even more in Photoshop. Let's just quickly have a look if we can help to it here a little bit in optics. And I think they introduced this new tool where you can just kind of sample the chromatic aberration here. So let's see if we sample the purple color here, and then if we sample the green, let's try to do that here. And it really helps. Let's see before and after. Let me really zoom in so you can see what we just done. So let's see, before you can clearly see the purple and green, and this is after. So there can be already a lot done in post-processing, so and in Lightroom. So I hope this was helpful. Anyway, other than that, I think technically very well done. I love the long exposure. I love the details on the foreground, and overall very good. On this one, let's have a look again here. ISO 100, f25, 4/5 of the second. Really high f-stop, and probably the reason why you're getting some sensor dust here. Again, easily removed by using the healing brush. So you're just gonna make it smaller and remove that like this, which is really simple. Let's have a look. I don't see any others since, so well done there. What I like is I like the details in the foreground. I love this really nice smooth sea and beautiful sun, well captures with a beautiful glow and lots of details. Obviously the color depth is really big, so you're getting mixture of different colors, but that's normal, and I think in overall it's very well captured. When it comes to composition, nothing I would add here. I think this foreground works well here, adding a little bit of depth. The leading line of the pier works very well as well. Obviously the sky is beautiful. Well done here. Not much I could add. On this one, post-processing, again, composition, great. Foreground, middle ground, background, beautiful sun, beautiful water. Just overall well done on both. Stevie, talking about post-processing, I think this look is almost your signature look, so I have nothing to add to it. In overall, it's very, very well done, and I love it. It's the colors you like, and I think when I look at the picture, it makes me think of you, so nothing to change here. On this one, I would just keep an eye on the blue, because it's pushing more towards being a little bit too much. I always like to go with the picker when I do the long exposure and just pick the white. So that just kind of give me an idea of where I am. So obviously we need more temperature and more tint. So then that can be adjusted really simply. We go in the mask, we select the sky. And then once we select the sky, we should be able to go in and invert the selection. And that's where we can really push the yellow and push the purple just to somewhere where it's reasonably more natural. So maybe not that much there, but probably here, and to something like this. And now when I show you before and after, I think it helps. I think it makes it just a little bit more natural. You don't want to take away the cool because it really helps in a contrast with the orange, but I think yours is almost becoming on the edge of unnatural. So I think in overall, this helps a little bit. So this is it. I hope it was helpful, Stevie. Great to see you back. Make sure that you keep coming back and share more pictures with us, and stay safe. Moving on, the next photographer, Tom. Tom, we have 2 pictures from you. So the first one here with the seals on the icebergs, and this one here from some kind of temple. Just talking about kind of impression, they are both quite noisy, to be honest. And this one looks like it had some sky replacement done, and you can see some lots of glow happening around the building itself. So let's have a look at it. Let's see if we go here, and let's have a look if we have a camera settings. So starting here, ISO 100, f4.5, 1/640th of a second. I wonder if it's the Olympus or something is creating lots of noise for you. When I zoom in, you can see it quite a bit, as well as in the darker areas of the image. So that's something you need to kind of have a look at and see if that could be fixed. Technically, otherwise the setting is quite good. ISO 100 is spot on. 1/640th of a second is good. Probably trying to keep the animals sharp, so well done there. f4.5, I'm not sure if I wouldn't go for something a little bit higher, just because obviously you want to have all the animals and everything nice and sharp, and you're not focusing on just one animal, you're focusing on the overall scene. So I would go more towards F9, I think. But depending on the situation there. I think when you kind of look at it like this from a distance, it looks sharp. It's just the noise which is a little bit distracting. Also doesn't help that it seems that the JPEG is a little bit lower quality. So when I zoom in, it kind of really start to pixelate, as you can see here. Talking about this one, ISO 400, f8, 1/30th of a second. So I think f8 and 1/30th of a second is spot on. ISO 400 does bring lots of noise, as you can see on the template itself. And then I'm really not sure what creating the glow around the rest of the image. Again, it could be sky replacement or it could be some kind of light, but it's a little bit distracting. And then you're also getting the sensor dust here, which again can be really easily removed by using the healing brush. Just one click and it's gone, and that's the distraction away. So on this one, technically, I would just keep an eye on my ISO that's about it, and see what the artifact is coming from. On this one, I would really try to see what is the noise coming from, the digital noise. Talking about composition, this is very lovely. I would crop a little bit closer, probably going more for something like this, as the foreground doesn't really add much to me. Maybe even something like this, even more powerful. Really, you're thinking the eyes and the animals is your main subject anyway, so that's how I would crop. Otherwise, it's very, very nice. On this one, to be honest, composition, I think it works, you know, it's a lovely building, there is a little bit of reflection, very dramatic sky, the palm trees. I think on this one, I would more focus on the technical part of the image rather than the composition. I think the composition is fairly good. Now, post-processing, I show you already when it comes to cropping, and otherwise I would leave it. It's nice, natural, the colors are good. I would leave it in this condition. I wouldn't do anything else with it. With this one, I would have a look at the exposure or brightness, because it seems a bit on the darker side. Keep an eye on your shadows, because some parts, they seem to be completely close and dark. So just open them a little bit more. But obviously, because it's a little bit noisy, once you start to open them, you start to introduce more noise. So this one is really the one where you want to go and check the technical part and see how you could improve on that in the future. Thank you very much, Tom, for sending us your photos. It seems like you're doing lots of traveling, which is super exciting. And if you have more images, make sure you send them over. We would love to see them. And then moving on, the last photographer in our landscape journey here, almost 2 hours today when it comes to landscape photography. So we have Zdenek. Zdenek's photos to look at. Zdenek is based in South Africa, and we have two kind of images. This one is probably one of my most favorite I've seen from you, Zdenek, so far. The purple in a contrast with the rest of the colors works great. The leading line works great. In overall, I really love it. Beautiful picture. This one is also very nice, going towards the wildlife imaging, the animal standing there, being alone. Again, on very nice contrasty background. I think it works very well, together with very interesting, the kind of bottom here. In overall, 2 very lovely pictures. So starting with this one, again, technical data, still with your Canon camera, ISO 100, spot on, f8, perfect, 1/400th of the second, depending what was needed for that scene. Always trying to make sure that you underexpose a little bit, so you keep all the details, especially when you're shooting during the day. Beautiful picture. So technically very well done. Details all the way, color grade, great light as well, so no harsh shadows. Perfect. On this one, ISO 100, f7.1, 1/400th of a second, obviously using 250mm lens. Perfect. Nice zoom in, far enough to see the whole animal in its natural environment, but close enough so we can recognize it. Well done there. Great. Technically, I think well done. Details all the way through. When I zoom in, let's see. There is a little bit of the harsh light hitting the animal, obviously, but the rest of the image is well, nicely lit. So in overall, well done there, Zdenek. Now, talking about composition, this one is spot on. Now, in overall, if there would be a little bit more sky, it would be probably, it would help. I think it would be a little nicer. It's really not a big deal, but it would be nicer. Always kind of keep the edge give yourself a little bit extra space. But and obviously the main subject is this, and the combination just really works. I think as a combination goes, the color contrast is very strong here, and it works really, really well. The leading line of the path works well. The kind of colors and the background just works well. Well done, Zdenek. Moving on this one, composition, really placing the animal in the center works. I think it's tilting for me just a little bit. This is what I would do. Other than that, it's great. You know, the animal being here. This is a picture you could totally print and put it on your wall because it would look great. Now, when it comes to post-processing, keeping it on this one, I would just close it a little bit, and I wouldn't use vignette for this one. I would use the radial gradient, just place it on the animal, and then go up here and invert it. And then I would just lower the rest of the image exposure a little bit to add more focus on the animal itself. And then I would create another mask and probably do the linear gradient from the top and linear gradient from the bottom. Here. Great. And the reason being why I'm doing this is because otherwise the image has a quiet even lighting all over the through, so it's just missing a little bit of the contrast. As you can see, when you look at this whole bulb of image, the light is pretty much same all over, and similarly here. So by adding these two, it just adds a little bit of the contrast, and it guides the human eyes closer to the animal. Now, looking at this one, similarly, we could add linear gradient up here, again, following a little bit of the path and closing it down just a little bit, nothing crazy, just a little bit, something like this. Similarly, just adding a little bit of the focus here, and then you could do with brush a little bit of dodge and burn, you know, just something like this, kind of highlighting the darker areas of the image and creating nice contrast where it's possible, and then brightening some other parts, not that much, but a little bit, playing around with the flowers, yeah, and brighter areas of the image. That's about it, Zdenek. Lovely pictures. This one is brilliant. Thank you so much for sending it over. As always, it's great to see your images. And if you have more, make sure you send them to us next week. And the same goes for all of you folks. If you want to join us for our photography review show, we are here every week on Monday. So if you want to see how you can join us, head to our website, cleverphotography.com/review. That's where you can find all the dates, links, and information about how to join us for the next episode and maybe become the photographer of the week. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us this week. Take care, and until next week, keep shooting.